All right, let's talk about one more renewable resource because this is going to affect you and me daily, maybe every hour. If you are drinking water, you are relying on the renewable resource of fresh water. Remember, salt water is an inexhaustible resource. Fresh water, however, is not. And one of the main reasons why fresh water is not an inexhaustible resource is that there's not a lot of it. So this graphic is taking a look at all the water we have in the world and then splitting up that water based on what type of water that is. So for example, of all the water in the world, 97.5% of it is saline, which means it's salt water, leaving only 2.5% being fresh water. Now I'm not going to ask you these percentages on the test, but what you should know is that saline has the overwhelming majority and that fresh water is barely anything. Now, if we take a look at this fresh water and we zoom into just that little peak, a majority of it, over half of it, is stuck in snow and ice. We are not, except in very small little colonies, we are not harvesting snow to melt it down into fresh water. Groundwater, about 30%. Depending on how close that groundwater is to the surface, we can take groundwater. We'll talk about that more in our water unit. And then finally, surface water is 0.4% of this 2.5%. This is where we're getting a lot of our drinking water. And so the point of this is just saying we have a very, very, very small amount of usable fresh water, which means it is more crucial than ever to make sure that we are using it responsibly and using it sustainably. And so I'll tell you about an example where that wasn't the case. And we're going to take a look at Cape Town, South Africa. And maybe you're familiar with it. This was such a huge deal a couple years ago. And I'm gonna look at this tagline first. Cape Town, day 0, pushed back to 2019 as dams fill up in South Africa. Day 0 was the day that this city said we are cutting off the taps. That when you turn on your sink, nothing's going to come out because their water that they had in their dams and in their reservoirs was so low that there was going to be no way they could support everyone anymore. So they were just going to cut the water off. And it was kind of a big deal. Imagine you and I living in the DC area. Oh, sorry guys, I'm going to have to turn off your water. Water doesn't exist. California has a lot of droughts, but they never turn their taps off. It's usually, hey, can you just water your lawn once a week? Things like that. So this was a really big deal. And the two main reasons for this, first one I'll actually say is drought. This area was experiencing drought for about 3 to 4 years. They're getting a lot less rain than typical, meaning that their reservoirs that they had for fresh water weren't filling up. They're also having huge population growth. This city was growing and growing and growing, and how much people were using was growing and growing and growing. And because it's a resource, right? We take advantage of the fact that we have clean running water, and we'll take multiple showers in a day, and we'll do whatever we want. Yeah, well, that has consequences. So eventually, this town was limited to 13 gallons of water a day. For kind of comparison, the average American uses about 90 gallons of water a day. This 13 gallons of water a day had to go towards showers, towards dishes, towards actually drinking, towards laundry, towards everything. In comparison to our 90, this was crazy. But the thing is it worked. Because of these sanctions, because of kind of the warning to everyone saying, hey, in 30 days we're turning off all the taps, people changed their habits. The citizens of Cape Town, which have millions of people, were able to cut their water usage by half. Half. Cape Town got lucky. The citizens got lucky. It started raining a little bit more. They weren't totally out of the woods yet. It started raining a little bit more. They were conserving their water like crazy, and it made a difference. Cape Town has now said that day 0 is no longer imminent. They don't have a date for day 0 anymore because they think they're out of it. But what they're hoping, what the town officials are hoping for, is that the changes that people made to cut down their water usage stick, or at least some of them stick, because this could happen again. In climate change, which we'll talk about in a future unit, droughts are only going to become more common. This is not a one-off instance. And so for people to be sustainable with our water, crucial. You can also think about all the organisms affected by this. Like, we are not the only ones in the world that need fresh water. So really, really important to make sure that we're using these resources sustainably. Now, I do have a video for you guys. It kind of takes a look. It interviews people in Cape Town and kind of shows you a little bit more from their perspective. And how not only was it kind of hurting citizens, I mean, having to give up luxuries, so to speak, but also hurting tourism. You know, people don't want to go there if they're like, oh, I can't even take a shower. So take a look at this video. So pause here, go watch this video, and then come back. So hopefully you got some insight as to what's happening in Cape Town from their perspective. But it's really good to know that things are getting better. Let's just hope that doesn't happen again. So I've given you 3 examples of renewable resources. We've looked at fish, we looked at lumber, and we've looked at fresh water. One last thing I want to talk about is this idea of tragedy of the commons. If you guys have taken an economics class, they usually talk about this in economics as well. And it was originally an economic theory. But we, as biologists, have adapted it to biological theory as well, using the same premises. Now, tragedy of the commons helps to explain why we overfish, why we clear cut, why we use all the fresh water that we want to. Tragedy of the commons is a way to explain how humans use our renewable resources unsustainably. So I'm going to use this example with sheep in a field. So let's say this is your backyard. You go and you're like, oh, or maybe it's not your backyard. Maybe it's just like the side yard. Like, no one owns it. It's just there. You're like, well, you know, I've got some sheep. I'm going to just let them roam there and they can eat. They'll get plenty of food. But then your neighbor on the other side of that lot's like, huh, Kirsten's got this sheep and eating on this food. That's a great idea. I've got some sheep too. You know, I'm going to let them roam there as well. And then another guy comes in, you're like, oh, well, this is a free pasture. Like, I'm going to get my sheep in here while that pasture still lasts. And everyone keeps adding sheep, which is using more resources and more resources. Grass grows back. But these sheep are eating it way faster than it grows back. And in this last picture, you can see that grass is more or less non-existent. There's no more resources left there. The more and more sheep you have, the more they're trampling down on it as well, preventing it from coming back. And the reason this happened is, honestly, human greed. The tragedy in Tragedy of the Commons is greed. If I can fish more fish than my neighbor, I'm going to make more money. I'm going to have more food than my neighbor. And that's why it happens. And it's kind of sad that we have a whole term for it, and that this is a really common term because it's a common instance. So the tragedy is human greed, and the commons is just referring to any resource that's commonly owned. The fish in the ocean, this pasture, the air we breathe is a common resource. And when you and I drive, we pollute that air that everyone uses. And that's a tragedy. And so we see this phenomenon exclusively with renewable resources. With exhaustible resources, well, we're all using it. And with inexhaustible resources, even if we're all using it, they come back. That's fine. So it's sad, and it explains why things happen, but sometimes it's also necessary. With that forest that we clear cut, we made $10,000 that day versus $10,000 over 10 years. Maybe I need that money right now. Maybe I can't wait. And so then what we need financially is kind of trumping, I guess, what helps us financially, but long term. So I'm not going to tell you to pause for the video here. There is a video, but this is also the last slide. So there is a video relating to Tragedy of the Commons that kind of illustrates this a little bit better and is an actual video. So be sure to check that out before kind of moving on to future lectures. So as an overview, what do we as humans need? We need a whole bunch of different resources. We need things that are inexhaustible. At least at the moment we do. We haven't been able to rely just on solar panel and just on wind power. Kind of need those fossil fuels. We also rely on inexhaustible resources, and we're starting to rely on them more and more, which is great. If we can use that solar energy and we have it forever, that's the best energy resource. And then we also have renewable resources. This is our food, more or less. This is our shelter. This is our water. These are things humans need, but we need to make sure that we're using them sustainably. We can use them, but make sure to leave enough behind so that it can come back on its own. It's more or less an infinite supply of a resource as long as we as humans are using it sustainably.